And in verse 2, we have the bringing of offerings. The English translation obscures a little bit that in the Hebrew, these two words are related, to bring and to offer, and the word offering. And they both involve drawing near. So God is communicating how the people can draw near, how they can come to him, approach him, connect with him. And as Sarah shared last week, God uses what the people know and understand, right? From their livelihoods and from their culture. He is going to talk to them in ways that make sense with animal and agricultural offerings. And as Sarah shared, critical to that first step of approach was purification. As the priests are installed to do their duties and responsibilities in the tabernacle, the first offerings they bring for their installation service are purification offerings in Leviticus 9. They are first purified, and then they offer the whole burnt offering. And the whole burnt offering is described in the book of Leviticus. It is called, as I've been calling it, the whole burnt offering, because it's the only offering in which all of the animal, except its hide, is going to be consumed by the altar fire. In Hebrew, it's the word olah, which comes from the verb Allah, to go up. And so it's also called the ascension offering. So it's the offering where it ascends. The whole thing is going to ascend up, because the whole animal is going to be transformed by fire into smoke that ascends to God in heaven. And the ascension or whole burnt offering is really significant for several reasons. It's both what's called a voluntary offering, meaning that people could bring it whenever they wanted to. You could choose to bring this kind of offering to the tabernacle just as something that you wanted to do for God, to give to God. And it is also the regular daily offering that was made twice daily, once in the morning and once in the evening, for the whole Israelite community. So twice a day, a year-old lamb without defect was offered, again at the morning and at the evening, as this whole burnt or ascension offering. And it was offered along with grain and olive oil and drink. And so the altar in the courtyard is actually identified many times as the altar of the ascension offering because of these daily offerings that were placed on it, these daily whole burnt offerings. So if you're an ancient Israelite camped around the tabernacle, every morning and every evening you see the smoke of this offering ascending, rising up into the sky, right? Ascending to God, who mentions that it's a pleasing aroma to him. So, okay, before we dive into the whole burnt offering, instructions, take your pulse, make sure you're still, awake here with me. But I just want to notice a few things, to observe a couple of things with you. One is simply, as we've been talking about, God he deeply desires to be with his people, and through his revelation, his covenant with Israel, he organizes Israel's worship and life in a certain way so that they could indeed dwell and actually fellowship with him. So how does this relate to us today? First, it's just that reminder. I said it a bunch, but it's okay to hear it again, that God does desire to dwell and to fellowship with us. Here this morning, we engage in that very reality as we worship. Second, I am reminded that ancient Israel could not approach God in any way that they wanted. The golden calf, that's just several chapters before this in Exodus, was not acceptable. Coming right after the installation of the priesthood in Leviticus 9 is Leviticus 10, which Nadab and Abihu offer unauthorized fire and are killed by fire that comes out from the presence of the Lord. There was a way to God, right? And do you see how these laws prepare for the one who will come, right? And declare, I am the way, I am the truth and the life. For an ancient Israelite living in a Near Eastern tribal culture, God provided a system of sacrifices and laws that made interaction with him possible. But this was always designed to be temporary, bound to a certain time and place, and a pointer to a fuller, living, embodied guide and means of interaction, right? Through Jesus, God's living tabernacle. So we live in a world of choice, and so many choices. We were talking about that in Sunday school. We become overwhelmed just with the amount of choices that we can face in a day. And always having choices, I think, can easily bleed into a mindset that our spirituality or our faith should be much the same, right? I can pick and choose what I want. But Jesus, I think, challenges our consumeristic sort of spirituality with what might feel hard, but is truly a beautiful message, that there is one way to God, right? And it is through him. He says to come to me, abide in me, bear the fruit of my vine, right? Model your life after me. And brothers and sisters, right, our mission as a community, as a church fellowship, is to connect others to the love of Jesus as we follow him together. And it's founded in these truths and these realities, right? That he's the way, the truth, and the life. So a challenge, as you think about these sacrifices, that God's made a way, right? He made a way for his people in ancient Israel through purification, these whole burnt offering that we're going to look at some more, and through the fellowship offerings that we'll look at next week. He made a way for them to interact and commune with him. And that those sacrifices pointed to a greater way, to Jesus. Jesus is the way. And so it's as a challenge, is there a person this week that you want to connect to Jesus' love, right? I'm not saying you're necessarily going to sit down and explain the whole gospel. Maybe you'll get that opportunity. But maybe you're just going to show up and be present with them in a hard time. Maybe it's a kind word in response to something snippy they have said to you. Maybe it's just offering them water or some food. It can be small and simple things, the ways that we connect others to Jesus' love. But I just challenge you, maybe even someone comes to mind as I talk this morning. Is there someone that God is laying on your heart to simply connect to Jesus' love? Now, Sarah was pretty gracious to you last week when she preached, and she did not go through and read all the instructions of the purification offering. I'm not as nice, which might be obvious, and I'm going to read to you the initial description in Leviticus 1, 3 through 9. So I hope, so follow with me. I won't read all the way to verse 17, but we'll just do 3 to 9. So if the offering is a burnt offering from the herd, you're to offer a male without defect. You must present it at the entrance to the tent of meeting so that it will be acceptable to the Lord. You are to lay your hand on the head of the burnt offering and will be accepted on your behalf to make atonement for you. You are to slaughter the young bull before the Lord, and then Aaron's sons, the priest, shall bring the blood and splash it against the sides of the altar at the entrance to the tent of meeting. You are to skin the burnt offering and cut it into pieces. The sons of Aaron the priest are to put fire on the altar and arrange wood on the fire. Then Aaron's sons, the priests, shall arrange the pieces, including the head and the fat, on the wood that is burning on the altar. You are to wash the internal organs and the legs with water. And the priest is to burn all of it on the altar. Right? The whole thing is consumed. It is a burnt offering, a food offering or a gift, an aroma pleasing to the Lord. All right, you made it through. All right. So the instructions will continue now for a couple more paragraphs in Leviticus 1 there. And they will describe how you can also bring a male goat or a male sheep or a dove or a pigeon, right? So there's various animals you can bring. A few things to observe, some noticings, as we talked about. Like all the sacrifices, the whole burnt offering or this ascension offering comes from the domesticated animals of ancient Israel. It comes from their herds and their flocks, or a few select types of birds. What this means is that the sacrifices come from their homes, from their livelihoods. They could not go out and catch a wild rabbit or a deer and bring it to God. They would go to their cattle pens and their sheepfolds and give back a part of what God had already given to them. And as they had to choose ones without blemish, noticing they couldn't just find a way to get rid of their sickly animals, right? They chose ones without blemish. And they too also noticed that God allows for a variety, right? A bull, a goat, a sheep, or a bird, because there's a sensitivity to the amount of resources any one person might have. Someone with less resources could bring a bird, right? Something that did not cost as much. So God desired that all the people in the community could honor him. No matter how much they had, they could bring something to the tabernacle as a part of these offerings. Okay, we are going to go through and look a little bit at the actual actions and talk a little bit about their significance. What do they mean? And then what do they mean for us? So notice when that animal is brought in, the person bringing it will actually lay their hand on the head of the animal. And here we have both likely a sign of ownership, like if you're bringing a bull, there's probably more than one person bringing that bull into the tabernacle. So the one who is bringing it puts the one who's going to offer it, it's theirs, puts their hand on its head. So we have a sign of ownership, but also identification. This was your animal that you raised, and you're now placing your hand on its head to say it's mine, and I identify with this animal. But then notice that the animal's throat is slit, the blood is drained, it's collected by the priest, and then they splash some of that blood against the altar, the sides of the altar. And on the one hand, right, these actions have some practicality to them. It's similar to preparing an animal to eat, which they would have done and, of course, known about. But on the other hand, there's also very significant meaning to these actions, right? In having to take the life of the animal and identifying with it, as you identify with it and take its life, there is a symbol of self-surrender, right? Of dying to oneself. And furthermore, a reminder that the life of this unblemished, right, unmarred animal is being given in a way for one's own life. Its blood dashed against the altar, a reminder that God has given them the lifeblood of the animal to cleanse and ransom them. That temporal reminder, and a pointer to the purification offerings as a whole. But the whole of the animal, right, except its hide, is placed on the altar of fire. And the flesh of that animal is burnt up and transformed to smoke that's going to naturally rise up to the heavens. Notice that it is, and mentions many times here as I list its name and as it's talked about in Scripture, it is the whole thing. Everything is given to God. So imagine standing there, right? Kind of take yourself, if you can, to that courtyard with that altar, with that animal, and you're watching it being the parts of the animal, the whole thing being placed upon that altar fire. And you watch that animal that you raised and selected and brought and laid your hand upon, claiming it's yours, and this one in my place is wholly consumed in the fire, wholly given to God. In this symbolic act, you declare, like this animal, I am all yours. Right? It's a way of saying that to God. I am all yours. And you see as the fire of the altar, right, which is the fire that's at that altar is linked to God's glory and his presence. It's kind of an emblem of it that they can see. It transforms the animal into smoke that ascends to God. God's altar fire transforms. You are reminded that the life given wholly to God is a life given over to God's transforming work. And as the smoke ascends, you're reminded of entering God's presence. And the words that this is a pleasing aroma to God, that your life given fully to the transforming work of God so pleases him. Do you see how the whole burnt offering, this ascension offering, it was a tangible way, a way of interaction that Israel could see, participate in, and be reminded of God's central words to them. Hear, O Israel, the The Lord our God, the Lord is one. So love the Lord your God with all of your heart and with all of your soul and with all of your strength. God wanted all of who they were. Twice a day, they were reminded that God was in the business of consecrating them, or as we would say, sanctifying them fully. Right? They were his. And do you see how Jesus was not only a purification offering, but also fulfills that whole burnt offering too? The one who gave his whole life, right? Who fully followed the will of his Father, who could say in the garden, "Not my will, but yours be done." And do you also hear echoes of his words of invitation? If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. Whoever would save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. In losing our lives to Jesus, we find not death, but transformed life. And brothers and sisters, as an invitation, I ask, is there one thing this week that God is saying to you, give this to me, right? Surrender it to me. Maybe it's something you want to surrender again. Is there a thought or an action? Maybe it's an ingrained pattern that, 2 steps forward and a step back, but that you'd like to change. Maybe you've been carrying shame or hurt for a long time. And Jesus says, surrender that to me. Hear what I say about you. Remember that for Jesus to say, not my will, but yours, he needed to know, and he did know, exactly what his Father thought of him. This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. We surrender our lives to the one who loves us and delights in us. Maybe your faith, your walk with God, is just sort of kept to one area of life. And Jesus just simply says, invite me fuller into your life. What would it look like to say, Jesus, I want to be more aware of your presence each day, right? And how you would call me to live in this one situation or in this one conversation this week. I believe we lay down our lives little by little, right? It's a daily surrender. We open our hands more fully to God so that we can see what he will make grow in our open hands of surrender. And we don't do it alone, right? We journey together. So I invite you to share with someone else. Is there something that you are laying down? Is there something that you're surrendering? You don't have to walk that road alone. We can walk it together, one another. And today we have the opportunity to engage and participate in communion, which is another way that we remember Christ's sacrifice, right? That he has cleansed us, he fulfilled that purification offering, but he also fully gave his life over to his Father, who was well pleased with him. And so as we are going to take communion together, and this is open to all who have placed their faith and trust in Jesus. If you're considering Jesus, I just invite you to take this time to reflect, to think, to talk to him. This morning, as was mentioned earlier, we are going to do things a little bit different than we sometimes do. We are actually going to pass the elements down to you. So we'll come around with the bread and then the cup. And I'd like to ask you to hold on to them. So just sit with them and we will take them all together. So we will pass them, hold them, listen to the words of the song, I Surrender All. And then when the song closes, I will come up and we will take the elements together. And then Tom will lead us in a verse of I Surrender All as we close out this time of communion.